The trembling hand pressed flat against the woman's blue winter coat wasn't a child's playful gesture. Thomas Mitchell knew that much. Through the swirling Detroit snow, the 7-year-old girl's fingers spread wide, desperate, silent. A signal Rex had trained him to recognize in the rubble of Afghanistan. The German shepherd's hackles rose, ears forward, body coiled like a loaded spring. The woman's grip on the child's wrist was too tight, controlling. The little boy beside them clutched a stuffed bear, tears freezing on his cheeks as snow muffled his quiet sobs. "Easy, boy," Tom whispered. But Rex's low growl said everything. The girl's eyes found his through the storm, wide, pleading, shimmering with terror. Her lips moved without sound. "Help us." Margaret Davidson smiled down at the children, her voice honey-sweet against the bitter wind. "Come along, sweethearts. Mommy's car is just ahead." But she wasn't their mother. And what Tom and Rex did next would change everything. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Thomas Mitchell hadn't always been the kind of man who noticed trembling children on snow-covered streets. 3 years ago, when Linda was still alive and their modest house on Elm Street still echoed with her laughter, he might have walked past without a second glance. But grief has a way of sharpening certain instincts while dulling others. At 65, Tom carried the weight of too many losses in his broad shoulders. 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine Corps bomb detection specialist had left him with scars both visible and hidden. The worst scar wasn't the shrapnel marks across his left arm or the persistent ringing in his ears from too many explosions. It was the memory of that October morning when Staff Sergeant Michael Mitchell, his son, his pride, his reason for re-enlisting at 58, stepped on an IED while clearing a village road. Tom had been 300 yards away when the blast tore through the morning silence. By the time he reached the crater, there wasn't enough left of Michael to bring home. The military gave him a folded flag, a Purple Heart for his son, and a medical discharge for the PTSD that followed. Linda held him through the nightmares, weathered his silences, and slowly helped him find pieces of himself again. Then cancer took her too, swift and merciless, leaving him alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum. Rex was all he had left now. The German Shepherd had served alongside him in Afghanistan, a military working dog trained to detect explosives and protect lives. When the same blast that killed Michael tore ligaments in Rex's hind leg, ending both their military careers simultaneously, it felt like cosmic cruelty. 2 broken soldiers discharged into a world that didn't quite know what to do with them. They'd found each other again at the VA hospital. Rex was scheduled for euthanasia, deemed too damaged for civilian adoption, too proud for a life of limitation. Tom signed the papers that day without hesitation. If they were going to be broken, they'd be broken together. Now they shared a daily routine that kept them both sane. Morning coffee for Tom, kibble for Rex, then a long walk through the deteriorating neighborhoods of Detroit. The city's economic collapse mirrored something inside Tom's chest. Empty lots where families once lived, boarded windows like closed eyes, silence where there should have been life. But Rex still served in his way. The dog's training never left him. He could still detect danger, still read the subtle signs of human distress that most people missed. His limp barely slowed him down, and his instincts remained razor-sharp. Today, January 15th, the blizzard had kept most sensible people indoors. The temperature hovered at -15, with wind chills that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Perfect weather for staying home, for avoiding the world. Yet here they were, as always, because routine was the only thing standing between Tom and the darkness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole. Rex stopped so abruptly that Tom nearly stumbled into him. One moment they were trudging through the ankle-deep snow on Maple Street, and the next, the German Shepherd had frozen mid-stride, his entire body going rigid with attention. Tom had seen this posture before. In the dusty streets of Kandahar, seconds before hidden explosives were discovered. Rex's ears pricked forward, his tail held straight, every muscle coiled with focused intensity. "What is it, boy?" Tom whispered, following his companion's unwavering gaze through the swirling snow. Through the white curtain of the blizzard, Tom spotted them, a woman in a bright blue winter coat walking with two small children. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Just another family braving the storm, perhaps heading home from the grocery store or a doctor's appointment. But Rex's hackles were rising, a low rumble building in his chest that Tom felt more than heard. The woman appeared well-dressed, her coat expensive-looking and clean, a stark contrast to the worn, practical clothing most residents of this neighborhood wore. Her dark hair was neatly styled beneath a matching blue knit hat, and she moved with purpose through the deepening snow. The children beside her, however, told a different story. The little girl, no more than 7, wore a coat that was clearly too small for her thin frame. The sleeves ended inches above her wrists, exposing pale skin to the brutal cold. Her shoes, canvas sneakers instead of winter boots, were already soaked through, and Tom could see her shivering even from 50 yards away. The boy, younger still, clutched a stuffed teddy bear to his chest with mittened hands, his face red and tear-stained above a scarf that looked homemade and well-worn. But it wasn't their inadequate clothing that made Rex's training alarm sound. It was the way the woman held the girl's wrist. Not the gentle, protective grip of a mother guiding her child through dangerous weather, but something firmer, more controlling. The little girl's steps were hurried, stumbling slightly as she struggled to keep pace while the woman pulled her along. Tom's military training kicked in, muscle memory from years of threat assessment. He began cataloging details automatically. The woman's nervous glances over her shoulder, the way she checked her surroundings every few steps, the children's body language, hunched, fearful, submissive in a way that spoke of more than just cold and discomfort. The little girl's free hand caught Tom's attention next. She was pressing it flat against the back of the woman's coat, her small fingers splayed wide. Not a casual touch, not the way a child might steady herself while walking. This was deliberate, repeated, a pattern Tom recognized from his military briefings about human trafficking and kidnapping scenarios. "Signal for help," he murmured under his breath, and Rex's ears twitched in response to the tension in his voice. The boy was crying now, quiet sobs that were barely audible over the wind. The woman leaned down and said something to him, her voice carrying a sing-song sweetness that didn't match the tight grip she maintained on the girl's wrist. The child nodded quickly, desperately, and clutched his teddy bear tighter. Tom felt his pulse quicken. Every instinct honed by 2 decades of military service was screaming that something was wrong. The woman's behavior, the children's obvious distress, the mismatch between their clothing and hers, it all painted a picture that made his blood run cold. Rex was pulling forward now, straining against his leash with uncharacteristic urgency. The dog had been trained to detect more than just explosives. Military working dogs learned to read human body language, to identify stress hormones through scent, to recognize the subtle signs of danger that even trained soldiers might miss. And right now, Rex was giving Tom every signal in his repertoire that said, "Threat detected, children in danger, action required." Tom's hand instinctively went to his pocket for his cell phone, then hesitated. What would he tell the 911 operator? That he had a feeling, that his dog was acting strange, that a woman walking with children in a snowstorm looked suspicious? In a city where police response times had stretched to over an hour for nonviolent calls, and where his own reputation as that damaged veteran with the limping dog preceded him, would anyone even take him seriously? The woman was moving faster now, pulling the children toward the abandoned industrial section of the neighborhood. Tom knew those streets, empty lots, boarded-up factories, places where screams wouldn't be heard even if the wind wasn't howling, places where someone could disappear. The little girl stumbled, and for a moment her hand left the woman's coat to catch her balance. But as soon as she steadied herself, the signal resumed, palm flat, fingers spread, pressed against the blue fabric with desperate persistence. She glanced back once, her eyes scanning the street, and Tom saw something in that look that made his chest tighten with recognition. He'd seen that same expression in the faces of Afghan children caught in crossfire, the wide-eyed terror of someone too young to understand why bad things were happening to them, but old enough to know they were in terrible danger. The silent plea for rescue from someone, anyone, who might care enough to act. That was when Tom made his decision. The same decision he'd made countless times in Afghanistan. The same choice that had driven him to volunteer for bomb disposal duty despite Linda's tears and Michael's protests. Some things were more important than personal safety. Some risks were worth taking. "Come on, Rex," he whispered, loosening his grip on the leash. "Let's see what's happening here." They began following at a distance, using the storm as cover. Tom's boots crunched softly in the snow as he stayed to the shadows between streetlights, grateful for the reduced visibility that would hide their presence. Rex moved like the professional he'd once been, despite his slight limp, silent, focused, every sense alert. The woman turned onto Warehouse Street, and Tom's heart sank. This was the worst possible direction. The street was lined with abandoned buildings, empty lots where Detroit's industrial dreams had crumbled into rust and decay. No witnesses, no help, no escape routes for two small children if things went wrong. Tom pulled out his phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. The storm was interfering with cell towers, or perhaps the infrastructure in this part of the city had simply given up, like so much else. He was on his own. The woman stopped beside a dark blue van parked between two abandoned warehouses. Tom's blood turned to ice as he watched her pull keys from her pocket and unlock the vehicle's sliding door. The little girl's signals became frantic now, her entire hand slapping against the woman's coat in obvious distress. The boy began crying louder, and the woman's sweet voice turned sharp. "Stop that noise right now, Billy," she snapped, and Tom caught the name. "Sarah, help me get your brother in the van. We need to get home before the storm gets worse." But the little girl, Sarah apparently, wasn't moving toward the van. She was backing away, pulling her brother with her, shaking her head with the kind of terror that comes from deep primal understanding that compliance means something terrible. Tom was 50 yards away, crouched behind an abandoned car, when he saw the woman's mask slip completely. The fake maternal sweetness vanished, replaced by something cold and desperate. She grabbed both children by their arms and began forcing them toward the open van door. That was when the little girl, Sarah, turned and looked directly at him through the snow. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, her eyes locked on his with desperate hope. Her lips formed words he could read even at this distance. "Help us!" Rex was already moving. Rex moved with the deadly silence of his military training, his injured leg forgotten as protective instincts overrode everything else. Tom followed, his own combat experience guiding him through the shadows between abandoned buildings. The woman, Margaret, he'd heard her call herself when speaking to the children, was struggling to force the little girl into the van while the boy clung to his sister's coat. "Sarah, sweetie, Mommy needs you to get in the car now." Margaret's voice had taken on a sing-song quality that made Tom's skin crawl. There was something fundamentally wrong with her tone. a disconnect between the words and the emotion behind them that spoke of deep psychological damage. But the girl, Emma, Tom had heard the boy call her, not Sarah, wasn't buying the maternal act. At 7 years old, she possessed an intuitive understanding of danger that kept her planted firmly in the snow, her arms wrapped protectively around her younger brother. "You're not our mommy?" Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Our mommy is with Jesus. Grandma Dorothy told us." Margaret's face twisted, and for a moment Tom glimpsed the broken woman beneath the carefully constructed facade. "Don't say that, Sarah. Mommy's right here. I came back for you, just like I promised I would." Tom crept closer, using an overturned dumpster as cover. Rex was ahead of him, positioning himself with tactical precision between the van and the children. The dog's training was evident in every careful step. He'd done this before, protected innocents from those who would harm them. "I want to go home to Grandma Dorothy," Billy whimpered, clutching his teddy bear tighter. "I'm cold and scared." "Grandma Dorothy isn't your real family," Margaret snapped, her composure cracking further. "I'm your mother. I've been looking for you for so long, Sarah." "You've grown so much since the accident." Tom's blood chilled as the pieces began falling into place. This woman was delusional, living in some fantasy where these children belonged to her, the most dangerous kind of kidnapper, one who genuinely believed she was rescuing them. Emma seemed to sense the growing instability in Margaret's behavior. She began backing away slowly, pulling Billy with her, her eyes darting around looking for escape routes or help. When she spotted Rex emerging from the shadows, her face flooded with hope. "Nice doggy," she whispered, extending one mittened hand toward Rex while keeping the other firmly wrapped around her brother. Margaret whirled around, finally noticing the German shepherd. "Get away!" she shrieked, pulling a kitchen knife from her coat pocket. "You can't have them. They're mine." Rex's hackles rose as he registered the weapon, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he placed himself directly between Margaret and the children, his body language shifting into full protection mode. Tom had seen that stance before, Rex defending wounded soldiers from insurgents, protecting convoy routes from suicide bombers. The dog would die before letting harm come to these children. "Easy, lady," Tom called out, stepping into view with his hands visible but ready. "Nobody wants to hurt anyone here. Let's just talk about this." Margaret's wild eyes fixed on him, the knife trembling in her grip. "They told me you'd try to stop me," she said, her voice taking on a paranoid edge. "But Sarah belongs with her mother. I won't let them take her away again." "Ma'am, I'm a veteran," Tom said, using the calm, authoritative tone he'd learned in hostage situations. "I can see you love these children, but they're scared and cold. Why don't we get them somewhere warm first, then figure this out?" "No!" Margaret screamed, lunging toward Emma with the knife. "Sarah, get in the van, right now!" Rex moved like lightning, intercepting Margaret's charge and knocking her backward into the snow. The knife flew from her grasp, skittering across the icy pavement. But Margaret wasn't finished. She scrambled to her feet with the desperate strength of someone completely unhinged. Tom rushed forward, trying to put himself between Margaret and the children. But she was faster than he'd anticipated. Years of planning this moment had given her a manic energy that made her dangerous and unpredictable. "You don't understand," Margaret sobbed, tears streaming down her face as she backed toward the van. "Sarah died in the accident. It was my fault. I was driving but then I found her again. I found my baby girl." Emma's voice was small but brave. "My name is Emma Thompson. This is my brother Billy. We live with our Grandma Dorothy on Elm Street." "Don't lie to me!" Margaret shrieked, and Tom saw her reaching for something else in her coat. "I know who you are, Sarah Elizabeth Davidson. You're my daughter and you're coming home with Mommy." Rex was circling now, keeping Margaret's attention divided while Tom tried to get closer to the children. The dog's tactical training was evident in his movements. Create confusion, maintain pressure, protect the principals at all costs. But Margaret had pulled out a second weapon, a small revolver that she pointed with shaking hands at Rex. "I'll kill that dog if I have to," she whispered. "Nothing will stop me from taking my daughter home." Tom's world narrowed to a single point of focus. He'd seen too many children die in Afghanistan, held too many broken bodies in his arms. Not again, not on his watch, not when he had the power to stop it. "Rex, down," he commanded, and the dog immediately dropped to the snow, trained obedience overriding protective instincts. Margaret smiled, thinking she'd gained control. "Good. Now, Sarah, Billy, get in the van." "We're going home where it's safe." But Tom was already moving, 20 years of Marine Corps training compressed into a single moment of decisive action. He dove forward just as Margaret swung the gun toward him, tackling her around the waist and driving her backward against the van's open door. The gun discharged into the air, the sound echoing off the empty buildings like thunder. Margaret fought with the frenzied strength of madness, clawing at Tom's face and trying to knee him in the groin. But he'd fought insurgents in hand-to-hand combat, survived ambushes and roadside bombs. A delusional woman with a gun was dangerous but not insurmountable. Rex was back on his feet instantly, circling the struggling pair and looking for an opportunity to help without endangering Tom. Emma had pulled Billy behind the abandoned car Tom had been using for cover, showing remarkable presence of mind for a 7-year-old. "You can't take them from me again," Margaret gasped as Tom wrestled the revolver from her grip. "I won't let the state put them in another foster home. I won't lose Sarah twice." "Lady, these aren't your children," Tom panted, finally pinning her arms behind her back. "Your daughter is gone. I'm sorry for your loss, but kidnapping won't bring her back." Margaret went limp suddenly, all the fight going out of her at once. "She was 8 years old," she whispered. 8 years old, and I killed her because I couldn't stop drinking. The social worker said I was unfit. They took her away and put her with strangers who didn't love her like I did." Tom felt a wave of unexpected sympathy for this broken woman, even as he kept her restrained. He knew something about loss, about the guilt that ate away at you from the inside, but sympathy couldn't excuse what she'd tried to do. "The accident wasn't your fault," he said gently, though he had no way of knowing the details. "But taking these children won't fix what happened to Sarah." "I just wanted my baby back," Margaret sobbed into the snow. "I just wanted one more chance to be her mommy." Emma's small voice cut through Margaret's breakdown. "Mister, is the bad lady going to hurt us anymore?" Tom looked over at the 2 children huddled behind the car. Emma's arm around Billy, both of them shivering but alive, unharmed, free. "No, sweetheart," he said firmly. "She's not going to hurt anyone anymore." The silence that followed Margaret's breakdown was broken only by the howling wind and Billy's quiet sniffles. Tom kept the woman pinned against the van, his mind racing through the immediate priorities. Secure the threat, protect the children, get help. But in this abandoned part of Detroit, during the worst blizzard in years, help felt impossibly far away. Rex limped over to where Emma and Billy were huddled behind the car, his protective instincts still on high alert. The German Shepherd's training told him to maintain perimeter security, but his heart, if dogs could be said to have hearts in the way humans understood them, was drawn to these 2 small, frightened children who reminded him of the village kids he'd protected in Afghanistan. Emma looked up at the approaching dog with wonder rather than fear. Despite everything she'd just witnessed, or perhaps because of it, she seemed to understand that Rex was on their side. "Is he a police dog?" she asked Tom, her voice carrying across the snowy space between them. "He used to be a military dog," Tom replied, keeping his voice calm and reassuring while maintaining his grip on Margaret. "His name is Rex. and he's very good at protecting people who need help." Margaret had gone completely still beneath him, but Tom could feel the tremors running through her body. Whether from cold, shock, or the after-effects of her breakdown, he couldn't tell. The woman who had just moments ago been wielding weapons and threatening children now seemed fragile, broken in a fundamental way that made Tom's heart ache with recognition. He'd seen that same shattered quality in the mirror during the worst days after Michael's death, when the line between reality and the nightmares had blurred beyond recognition. The difference was that Margaret had crossed a line Tom had never even approached. She'd put innocent children at risk to fill the void in her own broken soul. "Mister," Billy's small voice piped up, "I'm really cold." Tom realized that in the adrenaline of the confrontation, he'd forgotten how exposed the children were to the brutal weather. Emma's inadequate coat and Billy's soaked sneakers were no protection against temperatures that were now dropping toward 20 below zero. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. "I know, buddy," Tom said gently. "We're going to get you somewhere warm real soon." He looked around the desolate street, weighing his options. His own house was only 6 blocks away, but carrying 2 small children and restraining a potentially unstable adult through a blizzard wasn't feasible. The van Margaret had been trying to use was running. He could hear the engine idling, but using a kidnapper's vehicle felt wrong on multiple levels. That's when he spotted the warming light coming from a building he'd thought was abandoned, Joe's Corner Market, a small grocery store that had somehow managed to survive Detroit's economic collapse. Tom had walked past it hundreds of times on his daily routes with Rex, but he'd never paid much attention to whether it was actually open for business. "Mrs." Tom realized he didn't even know Margaret's last name. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to help you stand up, and we're all going to walk over to that store. You're going to stay calm, and you're not going to do anything to scare those children anymore. Do you understand?" Margaret nodded weakly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "I never meant to scare them," she whispered. "I just wanted Sarah back. I just wanted my baby back." The walk to Joe's Corner Market felt like it took hours, though it was probably less than 5 minutes. Tom kept one hand on Margaret's elbow, not restraining her so much as steadying her. She seemed to be in shock, stumbling through the snow like a sleepwalker. Rex flanked the children, his bulk providing a windbreak for their small bodies as they struggled through the deepening drifts. Emma had taken charge of her younger brother with a maturity that broke Tom's heart. She held Billy's hand, encouraged him when he stumbled, and even managed to keep his spirits up with whispered promises that they'd be warm soon. 7 years old, and she was already showing the kind of protective instincts that marked natural leaders. The bell above Joe's door chimed as they stumbled inside, bringing a blessed wave of heated air that made all of them gasp with relief. Joe Martinez looked up from behind the counter, a heavy-set man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, and immediately took in the scene, a grizzled veteran with a military dog, 2 underdressed children, and a woman who looked like she'd been through a car accident. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Joe breathed, coming around the counter. "What happened to you folks?" "We need to call the police," Tom said without preamble. "This woman tried to kidnap these children." Joe's eyes widened, but to his credit, he didn't hesitate. "Phone's right there," he said, pointing to an old rotary model behind the counter. "Kids, come here by the heater. Let's get you warmed up." Emma and Billy gravitated toward the space heater Joe had set up near a small seating area, their teeth chattering audibly as feeling began to return to their extremities. Rex positioned himself between them and Margaret, even though the woman seemed to pose no immediate threat. Tom dialed 911, grateful when the call connected on the second ring. "This is Thomas Mitchell," he said when the dispatcher answered. "I'm at Joe's Corner Market on Warehouse Street. I've got 2 kidnapped children here, ages approximately 5 and 7, and I'm detaining the woman who took them." The dispatcher's voice was professional but urgent. Are the children injured? Do you need medical assistance? Tom looked over at Emma and Billy, who were slowly warming up by the heater. Emma had removed her inadequate coat and was helping Billy out of his wet sneakers. They're cold and scared, but they don't appear to be physically harmed, Tom reported. Sir, can you tell me your military service record? The dispatcher asked, and Tom realized someone was running a background check on him, even as they spoke. Marine Corps, retired staff sergeant, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Tom replied. My service dog Rex assisted in the children's rescue. Understood. Units are en route, but the storm is slowing response times. Can you maintain the scene until they arrive? Tom looked at Margaret, who was slumped in a chair Joe had provided, staring at her hands. She seemed completely deflated, no longer the dangerous woman who'd been wielding weapons just minutes ago. Yeah, we can hold the scene. Joe had been bustling around, gathering supplies. He brought hot chocolate for the children, coffee for Tom, and even a bowl of warm water for Rex. On the house, he said gruffly when Tom reached for his wallet. Kids shouldn't have to be out in weather like this. Emma looked up at Tom with eyes that seemed far too old for her 7-year-old face. Mister, that lady kept calling me Sarah. She said I was her daughter, but I'm not. I'm Emma Thompson, and this is Billy. We live with our Grandma Dorothy because our parents died in a car crash 2 years ago. The pieces of Margaret's delusion became clearer. 2 little orphans who'd lost their parents in a car accident would have triggered something deep in a woman who'd lost her own child in similar circumstances. In her broken mind, she'd probably convinced herself that fate had brought them together. Where's your grandmother now? Tom asked gently. At home, Billy piped up around his hot chocolate. She's sick with the flu, so we went to get her medicine from the pharmacy. But then the storm got bad and we got lost. That's when the lady found us, Emma continued. She said she'd help us get home, but then she kept calling me Sarah and saying strange things. When I told her she wasn't our mom, she got really mad. Tom felt a surge of admiration for Emma's clarity under pressure. Many adults would have been too traumatized to give such a coherent account of their ordeal. This little girl had not only kept her wits about her, but she'd also protected her younger brother throughout the entire terrifying experience. Margaret suddenly looked up from her hands, focusing on Emma with desperate intensity. You look just like her, she whispered. Same eyes, same hair. Sarah would be about your age now if I hadn't. Ma'am, Tom said firmly but not unkindly, these children need to get home to their grandmother. She's probably worried sick about them. The sound of sirens finally broke through the storm's howl, growing closer with each passing second. Tom felt relief flood through him. Professional help was arriving, people trained to deal with situations like this in ways that his military experience hadn't fully prepared him for. But as he looked around Joe's corner market, at the children warming themselves by the heater, at Rex standing protective guard, at Margaret weeping quietly in her chair, Tom realized something profound had shifted inside him. For the first time since Linda's death, since Michael's death, since all the losses that had hollowed him out and left him walking through life like a ghost, he felt genuinely needed. Not just useful, not just going through the motions, but truly necessary to something larger than his own pain. These children were alive because he'd paid attention, because he'd trusted Rex's instincts, because he'd chosen to act instead of walking away. It wasn't enough to heal all his wounds, but it was a beginning. The police sirens grew louder until they seemed to fill the entire world, red and blue lights painting the snow-covered street in urgent colors. Through Joe's front window, Tom watched as 3 squad cars and an ambulance navigated carefully through the storm, their emergency lights cutting through the white curtain of falling snow like beacons in the darkness. Detective Sarah Williams was the first through the door, a tall woman in her early 40s with steel-gray eyes that took in the entire scene in seconds. She was followed by 2 uniformed officers and a pair of paramedics, all of them bringing the cold bite of winter air and the authority of law enforcement into Joe's warm sanctuary. "Mr. Mitchell?" Detective Williams approached Tom with her badge visible. "I'm Detective Williams. Are you the one who called this in?" "Yes, ma'am," Tom replied, standing respectfully. Years of military discipline had ingrained certain courtesies too deeply to ever fade. "These two children were being held against their will by that woman there. My dog and I intervened." Detective Williams' gaze moved to Rex, who remained at attention beside the children, then to Margaret, who was still slumped in her chair, and finally to Emma and Billy, who had moved closer together as the store filled with strangers in uniforms. "Children, I'm Detective Williams," she said, crouching down to their eye level with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years working with traumatized kids. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your names?" "I'm Emma Thompson," Emma said with remarkable composure. "This is my little brother Billy. We live with our Grandma Dorothy on Elm Street because our mommy and daddy died in a car accident." "The lady said I was her daughter," Billy added, pointing at Margaret without malice, simply stating a fact. "But I'm not." She was confused. One of the paramedics, a young man with kind eyes named Rodriguez, according to his name tag, began checking the children for signs of injury or hypothermia. "Their core temperatures are good," he reported to Detective Williams. "Some mild exposure symptoms, but nothing serious. They're tough kids." Meanwhile, the second paramedic was examining Margaret, who seemed to be in a state of near catatonic shock. "Blood pressure's elevated but stable," she reported. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" "Margaret Davidson," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted Sarah back. I just wanted my little girl." Detective Williams exchanged a meaningful look with one of the uniformed officers, who immediately began running Margaret's name through their database. Tom suspected they'd find a history, missing person reports, possibly previous incidents, the paper trail that always followed someone whose grief had twisted into something dangerous. "Mr. Mitchell," Detective Williams turned back to Tom. "Can you walk me through what happened? Start from the beginning." Tom found himself reliving the past hour in careful detail, explaining how Rex had first alerted to the situation, describing the signals Emma had been making, recounting the confrontation at the van and the struggle that had ensued. Rex remained by his side throughout the recounting, as if corroborating his testimony through mere presence. "And you're certain the woman was armed?" Detective Williams asked. "Kitchen knife and a small revolver," Tom confirmed. "Both weapons should still be at the scene near the van on Warehouse Street." "We'll secure the scene," she assured him. "Mr. Mitchell, I have to say, what you did today took considerable courage. Not many people would have gotten involved." Tom felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Rex did most of the work," he said, running a hand through the German shepherd's thick fur. "I just followed his lead." Emma looked up from where the paramedic was checking her fingers and toes for frostbite. "The doggy saved us," she said with absolute certainty. He knew the lady was bad before anybody else did. "Dogs often pick up on things we miss," Detective Williams agreed. "Rex here is obviously very well trained." "Military working dog," Tom explained. "We served together in Afghanistan. He's got better instincts than most people I know." The officer running Margaret's background information returned with a grim expression. "Detective, we've got multiple missing person reports matching her description from 3 different states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, all involving children between the ages of 5 and 8. Tom felt his stomach clench. "You mean this wasn't her first time?" "Doesn't appear to be," Detective Williams replied grimly. "Margaret Davidson was reported missing from a psychiatric facility in Toledo 6 months ago. She'd been committed after attempting to take a child from a playground, claiming the girl was her deceased daughter." The full scope of what could have happened to Emma and Billy began to sink in. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or temporary confusion. Margaret was a serial child abductor, driven by delusions that had been building for months or possibly years. "What happens to her now?" Tom asked. "Psychiatric evaluation, then charges," Detective Williams explained. "Attempted kidnapping, unlawful restraint, assault with a weapon. She'll get the help she needs, but she won't be able to hurt any more children." Emma tugged on Detective Williams's sleeve. "Can we go home now? Grandma Dorothy's probably really worried about us. She's sick with the flu, and we were supposed to get her medicine." "Of course, sweetie," Detective Williams smiled. "We just need to get your address, and then we'll take you home to your grandmother." As the children provided their address, 542 Elm Street, they said in unison, Tom realized his part in this drama was nearly over. Soon the police would drive away with Margaret, the ambulance would ensure the children reached home safely, and he and Rex would walk back through the storm to their own empty house. The thought filled him with an unexpected sadness. "Mr. Mitchell," Detective Williams approached him as her team prepared to leave, "we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement, and there will likely be court proceedings down the road." "I understand." Tom nodded. "Whatever you need." "There's something else," she continued. "The department has a community service recognition program. What you did today, it's exactly the kind of civic engagement we try to encourage. Rex, too," she added, looking down at the German Shepherd. "Both of you showed real heroism." Tom felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd been called a hero before, back when he wore the uniform, but those accolades had felt different. Military heroism was part of the job, expected, trained for. This felt more personal, more meaningful in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Emma broke away from the paramedics and approached Tom shyly. "Mister," she said, looking up at him with eyes that held depths of gratitude beyond her years. "Thank you for listening to your dog, and thank you for helping us." Before Tom could respond, she wrapped her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug that nearly undid him completely. Billy joined his sister, both children embracing this gruff stranger who had saved them from a nightmare they were too young to fully understand. Rex pushed his head against the children's legs, accepting their grateful pets, with the dignified patience that had made him such an effective military working dog. Tom suspected the German Shepherd understood exactly what had transpired today and took quiet satisfaction in a job well done. "You take care of each other," Tom managed to say around the unexpected tightness in his throat. "And you take care of your grandmother, too." "We will," Emma promised solemnly. "Will we see you again? Will we see Rex?" Tom looked at Detective Williams, who was watching the interaction with interest. "I live not far from here," he said carefully. "Maybe we'll run into each other on one of our walks." As the police cars and ambulance finally pulled away into the storm, taking Margaret to jail and the children home to their worried grandmother, Tom and Rex were left standing in the swirling snow outside Joe's corner market. Joe himself had pressed a bag of groceries into Tom's hands. "For what you did today," he'd said, and refused to accept payment. The storm was finally beginning to subside, the wind dying down and the snow falling more gently now. Tom realized he felt different somehow, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight of his losses didn't seem quite so unbearable. Rex looked up at him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to say, "Good work today, partner." Tom smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since Linda's funeral. "Yeah, boy," he said softly. "Good work." The call came at 3 in the morning, piercing through Tom's restless sleep like a blade. He fumbled for the phone on his nightstand, Rex lifting his head from his bed in the corner, both of them instantly alert with the hypervigilance that never quite left combat veterans, human or canine. "Mr. Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional but strained. "This is Dr. Patricia Henley at Detroit General Hospital. I'm calling about the Thompson children." Tom's blood turned to ice. He sat up immediately, fully awake, his mind racing through terrible possibilities. "What happened? Are they hurt?" "Emma and Billy are physically fine," Dr. Henley assured him quickly, "but their grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, had a severe reaction to her flu medication. She's been hospitalized, and the children are here with her. They're asking for you, Mr. Mitchell. They seem to think of you as family." Tom's chest tightened. In the aftermath of their rescue, he'd given Detective Williams his contact information as part of the official report, never imagining it would be used for something like this. "I don't understand. Don't they have other family? Social services?" "Their grandmother is their only living relative," Dr. Henley explained. "Social services is involved, but it's the middle of the night, and the children are traumatized. They've been through so much in the past 24 hours. Emma keeps asking for the man with the hero dog. She says you promised you'd take care of them if anything happened to their grandmother." Tom didn't remember making such a promise, but he could see how a frightened 7-year-old might have interpreted his parting words that way. "I'll be right there," he said without hesitation. Rex was already at the door, tail wagging slightly, sensing they had somewhere important to be. Tom threw on clothes and they headed out into the night, the storm having left behind a world transformed by snow and silence. Detroit General Hospital at 3 a.m. was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of worried families and overworked staff. Tom found Dr. Henley at the pediatric unit, a slight woman with tired eyes and graying hair who looked like she'd been working double shifts. "They're in room 314, she said, leading him down a sterile corridor that smelled of disinfectant and barely suppressed desperation. "Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, what exactly is your relationship to these children?" Tom struggled to find words. "Yesterday, my dog and we helped them when they were in trouble. I guess they feel safe with us." Dr. Henley stopped walking and turned to study him. "The police report mentioned you prevented a kidnapping, that you're a veteran." "Marine Corps," Tom confirmed. "Staff Sergeant, retired. And Rex there is your service dog?" "Military working dog," Tom corrected. "We served together overseas." Dr. Henley nodded slowly. "The children have been through severe trauma, first losing their parents, then yesterday's incident, now their grandmother's hospitalization. Sometimes traumatized children attached to the people who made them feel safe during their worst moments. You represent security to them." Through the window of room 314, Tom could see Emma and Billy huddled together on a hospital chair that was far too big for them. Emma's arm was around her brother, and she was whispering something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. Even from a distance, Tom could see the exhaustion in their small faces, the way they kept looking toward the door as if expecting more bad news to arrive. "How is their grandmother?" Tom asked. "Stable, but she'll be here for several days. The medication interaction caused some heart irregularities. At her age, we have to be cautious." Dr. Henley paused. "Mr. Mitchell, I know this is asking a lot, but would you be willing to stay with them tonight? Just until social services can make proper arrangements tomorrow?" Tom looked through the window again, seeing the way Emma's eyes lit up when she spotted Rex in the hallway. Billy actually smiled for the first time since Tom had known him, pressing his face against the glass to get a better look at the German Shepherd. "Of course," Tom said. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and whispered conversations. Tom sat between the children's chairs while Rex positioned himself at their feet, creating a protective barrier between them and the hospital's nighttime chaos. Emma curled up against Tom's side as if it was the most natural thing in the world, while Billy kept one hand buried in Rex's thick fur. "Mr. Mitchell?" Emma's voice was small in the darkness. "Is Grandma Dorothy going to die like Mommy and Daddy did?" Tom felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like lead armor. "The doctors are taking very good care of her," he said carefully. They think she's going to be okay, but it might take a few days. What happens to us if she doesn't get better? Billy asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting both children. Tom looked down at these two small people who had somehow become his responsibility, who trusted him with questions he wasn't qualified to answer. "You're not going to be alone," he said firmly. "I promise you that." As dawn broke over Detroit, painting the hospital windows in shades of gold and pink, Tom realized he meant it. Somewhere in the past 12 hours, Emma and Billy Thompson had stopped being strangers he'd rescued and become something much more significant. Not replacements for Michael, nothing could ever do that, but children who needed him, who saw him as safety and strength rather than just another broken veteran. Rex lifted his head and looked at Tom with knowing eyes. The dog had been watching this transformation, recognizing something in his human partner that Tom himself was only beginning to understand. Purpose, connection, a reason to be more than just a ghost haunting his own life. At 7 a.m., a social worker arrived, a harried woman named Patricia Woods, who looked like she'd been dealing with crisis situations for too long. She examined the temporary guardianship paperwork that Dr. Henley had prepared and frowned. "Mr. Mitchell, you understand this is highly irregular. Normally, the children would go to a licensed foster home while we locate more permanent arrangements." "I understand," Tom replied, "but they've been through enough upheaval." "If there's a way to keep them stable while their grandmother recovers—" Emma looked up at him with eyes that held too much wisdom for a 7-year-old. "Are we going to live with you and Rex?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Tom realized that everything in his life had led to this moment: the military service, the losses, the long walks with Rex through Detroit's abandoned streets, even yesterday's rescue. All of it had been preparation for something he'd never seen coming. "If that's what you want," Tom said quietly. "And if the grown-ups think it's okay." Patricia Woods sighed, recognizing defeat when she saw it. "I'll need to do a home inspection, run background checks, arrange for temporary guardianship paperwork. This is going to take time." "We have time," Tom said, and meant it. Rex's tail thumped against the floor twice, his version of applause. But as the morning wore on, Tom began to realize that time might be the one thing they didn't have. Dorothy Thompson's condition had worsened during the night. The doctors were talking about complications, about her age, about the stress her system had endured. Emma and Billy didn't understand the medical terminology, but they could read the worried expressions on the doctors' faces. By afternoon, it became clear that Dorothy Thompson was dying. Tom held both children as Dr. Henley explained that their grandmother's heart was failing, that sometimes when people were very sick and very tired, their bodies decided it was time to rest. Emma cried silently, the kind of heartbroken weeping that comes from understanding loss too young. Billy didn't cry at all. He just held on to Rex and stared at nothing. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Dorothy Thompson passed away peacefully with Tom and the children at her bedside. Her last words were whispered to Tom. "Take care of my babies. They're good children. They deserve to be happy," Tom promised, his voice breaking on the words. As the hospital staff began the process of dealing with death's paperwork, Tom found himself in an impossible situation. Two orphaned children who had just lost their last remaining family member, who were looking to him for answers he didn't have, for security he wasn't sure he could provide. Rex pressed against his leg, offering silent support, and Tom realized that sometimes the most important promises are the ones that seem impossible to keep. The tragedy that had brought them together was complete. Now came the harder part, figuring out how to build something resembling a family from the ashes of so much loss. The emergency custody hearing took place in a cramped courtroom that smelled of old wood and broken dreams. Judge Margaret Steinberg, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the paperwork while Tom sat at the defendant's table, feeling completely out of his depth. Emma and Billy waited in the hallway with a court-appointed guardian, their small faces pressed against the frosted glass window, watching for any sign of what their future might hold. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Steinberg said, looking at him over her reading glasses, "you understand the gravity of what you're requesting? You want to become the legal guardian of 2 children you've known for less than 48 hours. "Yes, Your Honor," Tom replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "I understand it's unusual circumstances." Patricia Woods, the social worker, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, while Mr. Mitchell's actions during the kidnapping incident were commendable, we have serious concerns about placing these traumatized children with someone who has no experience with childcare and who is dealing with his own psychological issues." Tom felt his face flush. His PTSD was part of his medical record, something that couldn't be hidden or minimized. "Your Honor, I've been receiving treatment through the VA. I'm stable, I own my home outright, and I have a steady income from my military disability pension." "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Steinberg leaned forward, "tell me why you believe you're the right person to care for these children." Tom was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that could encompass everything he felt but couldn't quite articulate. "Your Honor, 3 days ago, I was a man without purpose. I was going through the motions of living but not really alive. When Rex and I encountered those children in danger, something changed. They needed protection, and we provided it. But it wasn't just about that moment, it was about what came after." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Emma and Billy have lost everyone they loved. They're facing the same kind of grief that nearly destroyed me when I lost my son and my wife, but they're also showing incredible strength, incredible resilience. Emma protected her brother during the kidnapping. She comforted him at the hospital when their grandmother was dying. She's 7 years old, and she has more courage than most adults I know." Judge Steinberg made a note on her papers. "And you believe you can provide them with stability?" "I believe we can provide each other with stability," Tom corrected gently. "Your Honor, I'm not asking to replace their parents or their grandmother. No one could do that. But I can offer them safety, consistency, and someone who understands what it means to lose the people you love most in the world." Patricia Woods interjected, "Your Honor, there are qualified foster families who specialize in caring for traumatized children. Mr. Mitchell, despite his good intentions, is a single man with no childcare experience living alone except for a dog." "That dog saved their lives," Tom said firmly. "Rex has better instincts about people and danger than anyone in this courtroom. He knew those children were in trouble before anyone else did. He protected them when it mattered most." Judge Steinberg looked at the papers again. "I see here that the children have specifically requested to stay with you, Mr. Mitchell." Emma Thompson gave a statement saying, and I quote, "Mr. Mitchell and Rex are our family now. They saved us and they love us." That's quite a statement from a 7-year-old. "She's a remarkable little girl, Your Honor. They both are." "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Steinberg's voice softened slightly, "I'm going to ask you a difficult question. What happens if you discover that caring for 2 traumatized children is more than you can handle? What if your own psychological issues are triggered by the responsibility? What if you realize you've made a mistake?" Tom thought about the question seriously before answering. "Your Honor, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've failed people I loved, including my own son. But I've never quit on anyone who needed me. Not in the military, not in civilian life. If caring for Emma and Billy becomes difficult, and I know it will, then we'll work through it together. I'll get whatever help we need. I'll do whatever it takes." The courtroom was quiet for several minutes while Judge Steinberg reviewed the case file. Through the window, Tom could see Rex lying on the hallway floor between Emma and Billy, all three of them waiting patiently for a decision that would determine their future. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Steinberg finally said, "I'm going to grant you temporary emergency custody for 30 days. During that time, you'll undergo a full home study, psychological evaluation, and parenting assessment. The children will receive counseling to help them process their recent traumas. If everything goes well, we'll revisit the question of permanent guardianship at that time." Tom felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet," Judge Steinberg warned. "Raising children is the hardest job in the world, especially children who have been through what Emma and Billy have experienced. You're all going to need a lot of support." As they left the courtroom, Emma ran to Tom and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Are we going home with you now?" she asked, her face bright with hope for the first time since her grandmother's death. "Yes," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going home." The drive back to Tom's house on Elm Street was quiet, punctuated only by Billy's occasional questions about Rex and Emma's observations about the snow-covered neighborhood. Tom's modest two-bedroom house had never felt so small or so significant. This was where they would try to build something resembling a family. Over the following weeks, the reality of instant parenthood hit Tom with the force of an IED blast. Emma woke up screaming from nightmares about Margaret Davidson. Billy refused to eat anything but peanut butter sandwiches and had accidents during the day despite being potty trained. Tom found himself Googling child psychology and how to help traumatized kids at 2 in the morning while pacing the hallway outside their bedroom. Rex became the family's emotional barometer, sensing when the children were struggling and positioning himself accordingly. When Emma had nightmares, Rex would lie beside her bed until she calmed down. When Billy withdrew into himself, Rex would gently nudge the boy's hand until he started petting the dog's fur, slowly bringing him back to the present moment. The home study was invasive and exhausting. Patricia Woods examined every aspect of Tom's life, his finances, his medical records, his military service history, even his refrigerator contents. She interviewed neighbors, called references, and observed Tom interacting with the children over several visits. "Mr. Mitchell," she said during one particularly intense session, "I have to ask about your son's death. How do we know you won't project your grief onto these children? How do we know you're not trying to replace what you lost?" Tom had been expecting this question. "Ms. Woods, nothing will ever replace Michael. He was my son, and I failed to protect him. That's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. But Emma and Billy aren't replacements. They're themselves. Emma is brave and protective and too smart for her own good. Billy is gentle and loving and sees the world in ways that humble me. I'm not trying to resurrect my past. I'm trying to help them build their future." The children's court-mandated counselor, Dr. Rebecca Chen, was more optimistic. "The children are showing remarkable progress," she reported to the court. "Their attachment to Mr. Mitchell and Rex appears to be healthy and stabilizing. Emma's nightmares are decreasing in frequency, and Billy is beginning to open up about his feelings. Most importantly, they feel safe." 3 weeks into their temporary arrangement, Tom experienced his first major parenting crisis. Emma came home from her new school with a black eye and scraped knuckles, having gotten into a fight with a boy who called her orphan trash. Tom felt rage boil up inside him, the same protective fury he'd experienced during the kidnapping, but this time there was no clear enemy to confront, no obvious way to fix what was wrong. "I hurt him because he was being mean," Emma explained matter-of-factly while Tom cleaned her wounds. "Grandma Dorothy always said we should stand up for ourselves and for Billy." "Fighting isn't the answer, sweetheart," Tom said gently, though part of him was proud of her fierce loyalty to her brother. "What is the answer then?" Emma asked, her 7-year-old directness cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Tom realized he didn't have a good response. He was still figuring out how to be a guardian, still learning how to translate his protective instincts into actual parenting. Rex, lying at their feet, seemed to understand the complexity of the situation better than any of the adults involved. That night, as Tom tucked the children into their beds, Emma in what had been his and Linda's room, Billy in Michael's old room, he wondered if Judge Steinberg had been right to question his qualifications. Was he really capable of giving these children what they needed? Was love and good intentions enough to overcome his own damage and their shared trauma? Emma must have sensed his doubt. "Mr. Mitchell," she called softly from her bed. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you worried we're too much trouble?" Tom felt his heart break a little. "No, Emma. I'm worried I'm not enough for you and Billy. I'm worried I don't know how to be what you need." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know how to keep us safe. You know how to make Billy laugh when he's sad. You know how to make Rex happy." "That seems like enough to me." In the darkness of the hallway, with Rex padding silently beside him, Tom realized that maybe Emma was right. Maybe being enough didn't require perfection or complete knowledge. Maybe it just required showing up day after day and doing the best you could with whatever love and strength you had available. The court date for permanent custody was still a week away, but for the first time since this journey began, Tom felt something that had been missing from his life for years. Hope that tomorrow might be better than today. The phone rang at dawn on the day of the permanent custody hearing, pulling Tom from restless sleep. He'd been dreaming about Michael again, not the usual nightmare of the explosion, but a peaceful memory of teaching his son to throw a baseball in their backyard. Emma's voice calling from the kitchen had merged with the dream, creating a bittersweet moment where past and present collided in the space between sleeping and waking. "Dad," Emma's voice carried down the hallway, and Tom's heart stopped. She'd been calling him Mr. Mitchell for 6 weeks, maintaining that careful distance of a child who'd learned not to get too attached to the adults in her life. The single word "Dad" hung in the morning air like a prayer. Tom found her in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the coffee maker, her dark hair messy with sleep. Billy was at the table feeding Rex pieces of his cereal, both boy and dog engaged in their morning ritual of quiet companionship. "I wanted to make you coffee before the big day," Emma said, her 7-year-old hands managing the complex machinery with determined concentration. "Grandma Dorothy taught me how before she got sick." "Thank you, sweetheart," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's very thoughtful." Billy looked up from his cereal bowl, milk dripping from his chin. "Is today the day we find out if we get to stay forever?" Tom sat down at the table, pulling both children close. Rex positioned himself at their feet, creating their familiar circle of protection. "Today is the day the judge decides if our family becomes official," Tom said carefully. "But no matter what happens in that courtroom, you'll always have a home with me." Emma studied his face with the intensity that had become her trademark. "Are you nervous?" Tom considered lying, offering the kind of false reassurance adults usually gave children. But these two had been through too much to be fooled by platitudes. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm nervous because I love you both so much and I want everything to work out perfectly." "We love you too, Dad," Emma said again, and this time the word came naturally, without hesitation. "And we love Rex. We're already a family, even if the judge lady doesn't think so." The courtroom was packed when they arrived 2 hours later. Patricia Woods sat at one table with her stack of files and reports. Tom's court-appointed attorney, David Martinez, Joe's nephew, who'd volunteered his services after hearing about the case, arranged his own papers nervously. But what surprised Tom most were the people filling the gallery. Joe Martinez was there, wearing his best shirt and a tie that had seen better days. Dr. Chen, the children's counselor, sat in the front row with an encouraging smile. Detective Williams had come in her dress uniform, her badge polished to a mirror shine. Even Dr. Henley from the hospital had taken time from her schedule to attend. Most surprising of all was the delegation from the VA support group Tom had started attending. 6 other veterans, men and women who'd been strangers 2 months ago, had come to show their support for one of their own. Tom felt overwhelmed by this display of community, this evidence that his isolated existence had somehow evolved into something much richer. Judge Steinberg entered the courtroom with her usual stern demeanor, but Tom thought he detected a slight softening around her eyes as she took in the crowded gallery. "This is quite a turnout," she observed. "Mr. Mitchell, it seems you've made some friends." "Your Honor." Tom stood, his dress uniform feeling strange after so many years in civilian clothes. "These people have supported me and the children through this process. They've helped us become a family." Emma and Billy sat in the front row with the court guardian, both dressed in their best clothes. Emma in a blue dress Tom had bought her, Billy in a button-down shirt that made him look impossibly young and serious. Rex lay at their feet, wearing his old military working dog vest that Tom had retrieved from storage. Patricia Woods presented her report first. "Your Honor, while my initial concerns about Mr. Mitchell's qualifications remain, I must acknowledge that the children have shown remarkable improvement in his care. Their school reports are excellent, their psychological evaluations show significant progress, and they've demonstrated a healthy attachment to Mr. Mitchell and his dog." She paused, shuffling through her papers. "However, I still believe that a more traditional family setting might better serve their long-term needs." Dr. Chen was called to testify next. "Your Honor, I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years, and I've rarely seen such a positive transformation. Emma's nightmares have virtually disappeared. Billy has overcome his selective mutism and is thriving socially. Most importantly, both children exhibit a sense of security and belonging that is remarkable given their recent losses." Detective Williams testified about Tom's heroism during the kidnapping, emphasizing his quick thinking and courage under pressure. "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell didn't hesitate to put himself at risk to protect these children. That kind of character doesn't change. He'll protect them for the rest of their lives." But it was Joe Martinez who provided the most compelling testimony. "Your Honor, I've known Tom Mitchell for 3 years, watched him walk past my store every day with that dog of his. He was a broken man, carrying grief that would have destroyed a lesser person. But those children didn't just find safety with Tom, they gave him back his reason for living. You ask me, they saved each other." Judge Steinberg called for a recess to review the testimony and reports. Tom waited in the hallway with Emma and Billy, all 3 of them too nervous to speak. Rex seemed to sense the importance of the moment, remaining alert and watchful. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "if the judge says no, will you still be our dad anyway?" Tom knelt down to her level, taking both children's hands in his. "Emma, Billy, listen to me very carefully. The judge can decide about legal papers and official documents, but she can't decide about love. She can't decide about family. No matter what happens in there, you are my children, and I am your father. That's not changing." Billy wrapped his arms around Tom's neck. "Promise?" "I promise," Tom said, his voice breaking slightly. "Cross my heart." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Steinberg looked more serious than ever. The gallery held its collective breath as she reviewed her notes one final time. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "when you first appeared in my courtroom 6 weeks ago, I had serious reservations about your petition. A single man with PTSD, no parenting experience, requesting custody of 2 severely traumatized children. It seemed like a recipe for disaster." Tom felt his heart sink, but Judge Steinberg continued. However, I've been a family court judge for 22 years, and I've learned that the best predictor of a successful placement is not perfect circumstances. It's love, commitment, and the presence of a support system. Mr. Mitchell, you've demonstrated all three. She looked directly at Emma and Billy. Children, do you want to stay with Mr. Mitchell permanently? Yes, Your Honor, Emma said clearly. He's our dad now. He makes good pancakes, Billy added solemnly, and Rex sleeps in our room to keep the bad dreams away. Judge Steinberg smiled, the first genuine smile Tom had seen from her. Mr. Mitchell, I'm granting your petition for permanent custody. Emma and Billy Thompson are now legally your children. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Emma and Billy rushed to Tom, both children talking at once, their words tumbling over each other in excitement and relief. Rex stood and wagged his tail, his own form of celebration. 6 months later, Tom stood in the same church where he'd buried Linda. But this time the occasion was joyful. The adoption ceremony was small but meaningful. Emma and Billy officially becoming Emma and Billy Mitchell, their new birth certificates replacing the painful reminders of all they'd lost. Emma wore the same blue dress from the custody hearing, now her favorite outfit. Billy had insisted on wearing his fancy shirt, as he called it, and had spent 20 minutes that morning brushing Rex's coat until it shone. The German Shepherd wore a bow tie for the occasion, tolerating the indignity with typical military stoicism. Father O'Malley, who had known Tom since childhood, spoke about the mystery of how families form, sometimes through biology, sometimes through choice, and sometimes through the kind of divine intervention that brings people together exactly when they need each other most. As they signed the final papers, Emma looked up at Tom with eyes that no longer held the shadows of trauma and loss. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Do you think Mommy and Daddy and Grandma Dorothy are happy that we found you?" Tom thought about Michael and Linda, about Dorothy Thompson, who had entrusted him with her most precious treasures, about the strange and winding path that had led them all to this moment. "I think they're very happy," he said. "I think they sent us to each other." Billy tugged on Tom's sleeve. "What about Rex? Do you think Rex is happy?" They all looked at the German Shepherd, who was patiently enduring the attention of several well-wishers. As if sensing their gaze, Rex looked up and met Tom's eyes with that familiar expression of loyalty and understanding. "I think Rex is exactly where he's supposed to be," Tom said. "We all are." That evening, as Tom tucked his children into their beds, no longer the children, but his children, no longer temporary but permanent, he reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The blizzard that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The loss that had threatened to destroy them all had somehow transformed into the foundation for something stronger. Emma's breathing evened out into sleep, and Billy curled up with his teddy bear, both children secure in the knowledge that they were loved, protected, and home. Rex settled into his spot on the floor between their beds, guardian and friend, the silent hero whose instincts had started this whole miraculous chain of events. Tom sat for a moment in the doorway, watching over his family, and realized that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as the worst disasters. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were really meant to have. Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time it didn't look like an ending. It looked like promise. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin in the darkest moments of our lives. Tom Mitchell thought his story ended with loss. His son Michael, his beloved wife Linda, his sense of purpose. At 65, he was simply surviving, walking through each day with his loyal companion Rex, both of them wounded veterans trying to make sense of a world that seemed to have moved on without them. But on that snowy January morning in Detroit, When Rex's keen instincts detected two children in desperate need, Tom discovered that endings can become beginnings in ways we never expect. The rescue of Emma and Billy wasn't just about saving two innocent lives from a dangerous predator. It was about the miraculous way broken people can heal each other. Tom's military training and Rex's protective instincts created the perfect storm of heroism, but it was love that transformed a moment of crisis into a lifetime of family. Emma, at just 7 years old, showed the kind of courage that inspired a grown man to remember what it meant to have something worth fighting for. Billy, with his gentle heart and trust in the goodness of people, reminded Tom that innocence still existed in a world that often seemed dark. The journey from that first desperate signal Emma pressed against Margaret Davidson's coat to the warm reality of bedtime stories and homework help wasn't easy. Tom had to confront his own demons. The PTSD that made him question his stability, the grief that made him wonder if he deserved happiness again, the fear that he might fail these children the way he felt he'd failed his son, the legal battles, the home studies, the sleepless nights when Emma woke from nightmares about the kidnapping. Every challenge tested their fragile bond. But Rex was there through it all, the four-legged anchor who kept them grounded when the world felt unstable. The German Shepherd's presence reminded them daily that loyalty transcends species, that protection comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important family members are the ones who can't speak human words but communicate love in ways that transcend language. Rex didn't just help save Emma and Billy, he helped save Tom from a life of isolation and purposelessness. The courtroom scenes revealed something beautiful about community. When Tom thought he was alone in his quest to provide these children with a home, an entire network of support emerged. Joe Martinez, who had watched Tom's daily walks for years, suddenly became an advocate. Detective Williams, who could have simply filed her report and moved on, became a character witness. Dr. Chen, the children's therapist, saw beyond the unconventional circumstances to recognize genuine healing taking place. The veterans from Tom's support group, strangers who became brothers in arms once again, filled the gallery to show that those who serve never truly serve alone. Emma and Billy's transformation from traumatized orphans to thriving children illustrated the resilience of the human spirit when nurtured by unconditional love. Emma's protective instincts toward her brother, her mature understanding of adult complexities, and her brave decision to trust Tom despite all she'd endured showed that wisdom often comes in small packages. Billy's gradual emergence from fear, his growing confidence, and his special bond with Rex demonstrated that healing happens at its own pace when safety is assured. The adoption ceremony wasn't just a legal formality. It was a celebration of chosen family, of love that transcends bloodlines, of the way grace works in mysterious ways to bring people together exactly when they need each other most. Tom's transformation from broken veteran to protective father, Emma and Billy's journey from frightened orphans to confident children, and Rex's evolution from wounded warrior to family guardian. All of these stories intertwine to create something larger than the sum of its parts. This story resonates because it touches universal truths about loss, redemption, and the unexpected ways our lives can change direction. For those who have experienced the death of children, the loss of spouses, the struggle to find meaning after career-defining work ends, Tom's journey offers hope that our stories aren't over when we think they are. His willingness to trust Rex's instincts reminds us that sometimes our most important decisions come from the heart rather than the head, from intuition rather than logic. The blizzard that could have been just another winter storm became the backdrop for a miracle. Margaret Davidson's mental illness, tragic as it was, became the catalyst that brought this family together. Even trauma and loss, when met with courage and love, can be transformed into something redemptive. The snow that fell at the end wasn't an ending. It was a promise of renewal, of fresh starts, of the possibility that tomorrow can indeed be better than yesterday. Rex's silent heroism reminds us that the most profound communications often happen without words. His ability to sense danger, to provide comfort, to bridge the gap between Tom's military experience and civilian family life, illustrates the special relationship between humans and the animals who choose to love us. In a world that can feel increasingly divided and harsh, Rex represents the constant, faithful presence that grounds us and reminds us what truly matters. For those of us who have reached the stage of life where we're more aware of endings than beginnings, where loss seems to accumulate faster than gains, where we sometimes wonder if our best days are behind us, Tom's story offers a different narrative. It suggests that our experiences of pain and loss aren't meaningless suffering, but preparation for service we didn't know we were called to provide. His military service prepared him to recognize danger and act decisively. His losses prepared him to understand the children's grief and help them heal. Even Rex's injury, which ended his military career, positioned him perfectly to become a family dog who could protect and comfort. The message here isn't that everything happens for a reason. That would minimize the reality of genuine tragedy and loss. Rather, it's that we have the power to create meaning from our experiences, to let our wounds become wisdom, to transform our survival into service. Tom didn't save Emma and Billy because he was perfect or fully healed. He saved them because he was present, because he paid attention, because he was willing to act when action was needed. Have you ever experienced a moment when an ending in your life unexpectedly became a new beginning? What role have animals played in your family's story of love and healing? Share your thoughts below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we tell each other about how love finds a way, even in the darkest winters of our lives.